Hey there, and welcome. I'm Anna Hartman, and this is Unreal Results, a podcast where I help you get better outcomes and gain the confidence that you can help anyone, even the most complex cases. Join me as I teach about the influence of the visceral organs and the nervous system on movement, pain, and injuries, all while shifting the paradigm of what whole body assessment and treatment really looks like. I'm glad you're here. Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome to another episode of the Unreal Results podcast. Today, and maybe even for this week and maybe even for the next week or two, maybe more, we'll see how long it stays on my brain. Gonna be talking about the foot and ankle. I've been working on my plate. I don't want saying I'm working on it is probably not accurate, but on my plate for a while now has been to get out a new self-paced course on the foot and ankle. I actually promised it during the 2023 birthday flash sale. I want to be embarrassed by that, but I'm not, because I'm a procrastinator. This is also why I don't do things like that normally. I probably shouldn't have sold it then. Well, I didn't sell it. I offered it as a bonus. I probably shouldn't have done it then. But part of the reason I did it was to put me on the hook to finish it. But life happened and that it didn't happen. So I owe it to those 10 people. Then for my 2024 birthday flash sale, I was like, oh, this is the chance. Get it done by then. So then I offered it as a bonus to actually not, did I offer it as a bonus during that flash sale? Maybe not. I reached out to them and was like, don't worry, I haven't forgotten about you. But then maybe during the LTAP, I offered it as a bonus during that. So oh my gosh, sorry for the yawns. I owe another group of people this course. So my apologies for you if you've been waiting for a while. I had it all scheduled in my calendar to do and finish and have out in November. But if you've been here, November 2024 was lost to severe pink eye, and I wasn't able literally to do any work on the computer, and so it got pushed again. And then I was like, I'll get it out by December, but between the eyes still being sensitive to all the work on the computer and then Christmas and the New Year, still not done. But it is back on the docket as the primary first thing to get out in 2025. So with that said, I've been mentally thinking through all of the things I want to cover in the course. Of course, all of my courses, like a big part of it is like, yes, foot and ankle from a movement and a musculoskeletal standpoint, but also looking at visceral and nervous system issues and how they relate. And also, how do we even look at the movement and the biomechanics through this whole organism lens of view that considers the viscera and the nervous system as a deeper driver or like the whole organism as a deeper driver for what's going on. So, what I wanted to share about that in this episode, because like I said, I'm probably going to do multiple episodes on foot and ankle as I'm going here to sort of like filter out my ideas. But one thing that's been on my mind has been foot pain through the lifespan, or foot complaints through the lifespan, maybe. So a few months ago, you might remember me talking about foot pain that I'd been having sort of on and off for a while now, but like pretty intense foot pain, especially in the morning. And with no like specific mechanisms. And I was thinking about the other day and I was like, wow, I haven't had foot pain for a while now. I am walking a little bit less, so that could be part of it. But I think really what it is, and sort of what it's come down to, is very visceral of a driver, and like more related to hormonal, visceral, fluid driver for me than anything else. And I've in just being more curious about it, I have noticed that like on the days that maybe I do have a little bit of foot pain when I wake up, it's definitely on days that I know I am more bloated or like have more fluid congestion in my whole system, and or have like a bigger load on my kidneys and liver from a toxin standpoint. So that's interesting. And the other bit of just noticing my feet is my niece, my youngest niece, she's 4, turning 5 soon. She's been complaining of foot pain or not pain, foot discomfort, specifically foot weakness and feet being tired for a while now, like a few months, if not more. It's kind of one of those things when, especially when they're little kids, that's like, are they just complaining to complain, or is this like a legitimate thing? So this has been on my mind of just like, they're good examples of how foot pain is not musculoskeletal foot pain also, and it's not just as we age, because I think that, well, and this is kind of like in regards to my foot pain and like how even I'm framing this is being the age I'm at, which is 44. I turned 45 this year. And then also like the people I follow on social media, sometimes it's just the algorithm, right? Seeing a lot about perimenopause and menopause. And then also like my sister's a little bit older than me, so she's kind of in that stage too. And then also I feel like it's kind of like a buzzword in online business marketing right now, like trend, you know how like the trends go. So like we've been in that trend of like vagus nerve and nervous system regulation and all the things, right? Like the next trend is being like perimenopause, and everything's like perimenopause, which I don't think is a bad thing, because boy, as I'm learning all the symptoms that can come with perimenopause, the transition into menopause, the time around this transition, I think back to my grandma and some of the symptoms that she was having in her body that the doctors kind of like poo-pooed and didn't have answers for. And she literally thought she was a crazy person. She had ringing in her ears for years and nobody could really figure it out. And now I'm like, it's probably a perimenopause symptom. That if we had like addressed it from that lens of view, she probably could have gotten some relief. But instead the doctors are just like, oh, it's from using Advil too much. I'm like, what? I mean, which I guess can be a thing, but I'm like, or it's menopause. Anyways, so I'm not like mad about this trend. It's just like, obviously, like I see a lot of information for it. And I think I even mentioned this during the Pink Eyes Chronicle episode, was like, I was kind of daily in this game of like, I was having a low grade fever and like body aches. And I'm like, is this hormones? Like, is this perimenopause, or is this pink eye, or am I sick? Like, is something else going on? Do I have like some sort of serious thing happening? So this is like like, we're at the age now that it's a daily question. Like, is this thing that's happening to me in my body, is this a legit illness, a legit orthopedic thing, or is it perimenopause or something else? So that's why it's been on my mind. But okay, going back to my niece, who is not going through perimenopause, who is going through the first stages of life as she turns 5. So, like I said, she's been complaining of her feet being tired. And when they get really tired, she's like, I can't walk. And finally, the complaint had gotten like common enough that my sister finally took her to the pediatrician and was like, do you know what's going on with her? And the pediatrician, when asking my niece, like, what does she feel? Like, is it painful? My niece, who's very smart, is like, it's not, like, very adamant. Like, it's not pain. My feet don't hurt. They feel tired. They feel weak. Like, when we ask her to describe it more, she's like, they feel weak, which I'm like, first of all, what 4-year-old, 5-year-old, like, knows what that even means? But yet that's the best way that she can describe it. And so they did some blood work on her, and the blood work came back, I would assume, like, fairly unremarkable, because it didn't trigger a follow-up from the doctor, which is a whole nother conversation of annoyance. But when I looked at or like when my sister sent me, like the only thing my sister noticed was this like one thing that was out of range, but it turns out that the range they were referencing was in the adult limit, and she was totally normal within the kids limit. And then the other thing that was low, she had like her potassium was a little low, and that's all my sister really noted. And I didn't look at the results personally. So I go home, we don't live in the same town. So I go home at like Thanksgiving, and I evaluated her just real quick. Like, when it's little kids like that, it's not like you sit down for a 90-minute session. It's like, hey, can you sit still long enough for me to check a couple things out? And I'm like, oh yeah, so your feet have been not feeling great. Can you describe it? And again, with me, she was like, they're tired, they're weak. And I'm like, okay, well, let me like test it. And I tested the mobility, and I did a little listening, and I'm not feeling like a lot of like tightness, like not limited mobility. Not really feeling any nerve tension or anything like that. And so I'm like, I wonder, like, you're complaining of weakness. So, like, I wonder if I strength tested you, like, how would it be? And then I'm like, I don't even know how accurate a strength test is in a almost 5-year-old. And so I was like, just did a couple simple things. I was like, hey, like, let me see you point your feet. Let me see you dorsiflex, which did no problem. And then I was like, can you spread your toes? And she's like, she couldn't spread her toes. So I was like, that's not ideal, but it's also like, well, it's not like the weakest thing in the world. But I'm also like, as someone, like, she doesn't spend that much time in shoes. She's like barefoot quite a bit. Like, she should have better toe splay. So I'm like, I was like, well, will you stand up and do calf raises for me? And so, imbalance on one leg. And so she balances on one leg. No problem. Calf raises, though, I was like, first it was like getting her to understand what I'm asking her, right? Demonstrating it, showing her, like helping her out. And she double leg calf raise could only do like 3 to 5 before she significantly decreased her range of motion. And I'm like, well, that's concerning. That's weak. And so then I looked at single leg, and same thing, like barely could do 3 without losing significant range of motion. And I'm like, I'm not sure, like, is it just task-oriented focus or what? Because at the same time, she's like super athletic kid, loves playing sports, loves running around, jumping around. Like, she's always on the go, always moving. So I'm also like looking at this potential weakness and thinking like, I don't even understand how she could be this weak but be that active. So it was a little weird, but I was like, okay, well, maybe do these exercises, and then, like, I don't know, we'll see how you feel. And then I was like, you know what, I need to reach out to my friend Bonnie Marlowe. I will have Joe link her in the show notes. She is an amazing pediatric physical therapist. I think her Instagram handle is like BeWellBB. But like I said, I'll link it in the show notes. So I reached out to Bonnie and I was like, hey, is it okay if I ask you a professional question? And of course she's like, yeah. So I'd sent her this whole scenario and she's like, wow, that's a really weird thing for that age to complain about. And also she's like, yeah, she should be stronger than that. Like the things that you strength tested are pretty simple and she should be able to demonstrate them better. And she's like, she's okay single leg balance? And I was like, yeah. And, and both me and her are like wondering about neuro stuff. But I'm like, the doctor checked her reflexes according to my sister. And like, I'm like, it's just not really feeling neuro to me, but it's not feeling orthopedic. I was like, but it's confusing me. And so Bonnie keeps thinking about it. And she asked me a question. She's like, so she did blood work? And I was like, yeah. And I don't think that it came back anything significant. She's like, did they test her iron? And I was like, huh. I was like, actually, I don't know. My sister didn't tell me that. So I said, but I'll ask her about it because in general, my family tends to have low iron. And I was like, hey, asked my sister, what's her iron? And sure enough, her iron was low. And so I was like, oh yeah, it can be low. So then I Googled low iron, weak feet. And that is shockingly enough, and this is why I'm like, Bonnie is amazing, because that is a symptom of low iron in children, is to have weak feet. And then what I read when I Googled it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is totally what's going on. Is low iron can be caused by excessive milk consumption. And my niece is 100% so significantly addicted to drinking milk. Still a bottle, that's a whole nother story. But she drinks a lot of milk, and I'd say 24 ounces at minimum a day, like some days more. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's what it is. So I told my sister, and she tried to decrease, which is a challenge when a kid is that addicted to the cow's milk. And but anyways, over Christmas I was like helping with this, and like sure enough, like when she has less milk, she doesn't complain about her feet. And then I strength tested her, and she strength tests better. And so I explained to Ella, like, hey, this was, again, like thinking she's smart. And then I gave her this like visual. I clapped really. I was like, you know what milk does to iron? Because I explained to her how the iron was helping our muscles be strong by bringing oxygen to them. And I said, you know what the milk does to the iron? And she's like, what? And I was like, and I clapped really hard, and I was like, it destroys it. It smashes the iron, and then the iron can't bring the oxygen to the muscles, and that's why you feel weak. And she was like, whoa. And then for the few days after that, she would like refuse milk, and then she would explain to anybody who was listening that the milk smashes the iron and that's why your feet are weak. And so I was like, wow, fascinating. I was like, this is fascinating. One, I don't even know if people knew that it was a thing. So spoiler alert, excessive milk. That is why doctors have limits on how much milk kids should be consuming. And at certain ages, and when they consume too much, it can affect their iron levels. And when their iron levels are low, one of the things that could be a symptom is foot weakness. And the other symptoms are like irritability, mood swings, like all the things that she happens to also have. But I'm also like, and that's a kid. It's hard to know if it's mood swings and irritability from a hematocrit type thing versus like just a terrible terrorist 2-year-old, 3-year-old, whatever, 4-year-old. So anyways, it's nice to have a little bit more understanding of what's going on with her. And it was so interesting. And I'm so thankful for Bonnie for like helping us figure it out. And now we're just challenged, still getting her off the milk. She's doing better, but has her moments. So, but it just was a really good example to me of like, foot pain across the lifespan often is driven from other things that we're not really necessarily always thinking about. And goes back to, like, again, this whole organism view, that when you can appreciate all of the systems of the body having to run optimally and being more important for the full function of the body, you start to see the orthopedics in a different way. And so I just was like, I want to share this story on the podcast because I think it's highlights things so much. And then, like, yeah, so one of a really common thing in perimenopause and then in menopause, also into menopause, after menopause, is foot pain and women's arches collapsing, right? Going from like an arched foot to a flat foot as they transition through these stages because of the effect of the hormones on the tissue. So as estrogen decreases, our collagen types shift. We become stiffer. Our collagen becomes less elastic, and it just also decreases the amount of like our fat pads and our fatty tissues. It affects every soft tissue in the body, the decrease of estrogen. And so it's something to consider, especially in your patients who are in that perimenopause or postmenopausal that are having foot pain that isn't resolving like traditional foot pain, right? It's something to consider. There's also, like, as we age, both male and female, this decrease of fat pad stiffness. And because we are bipedal upright people, right, this change in our fat pad changes the pressures of our foot and can create a lot of foot pain. This is also why Achilles tears and Achilles tendonitis is so much more common as you age versus younger, right? So this role that the fat pad has in the relationship between plantar fasciitis, or the plantar fascia, and the Achilles tendon probably plays a significant role in our heel pain and our general foot pain or Achilles tendonitis issues as we age. The other big part of it, I think, of everyone's foot pain throughout the spectrum of the timeline of their aging, is the role that the fluid system plays on foot pain. And I know it is like sometimes feels like a broken record from me, but I cannot stress enough how powerful the swelling reduction protocol is in whole body health and wellness, and especially see this in the low leg, right? And I discuss this a lot in the podcast about my exertional compartment syndrome, in the podcast about shin splints, in the podcast about restoring distal pulses post-surgical. Our lower leg, and therefore our foot and ankle, function, mobility, strength, stability, performance of the movement of plantar flexion and dorsiflexion, inversion, like all the movements that our foot and ankle have to make, are significantly affected when we have stagnant fluid in our lower leg that is having a hard time returning to the trunk, right? And the easiest way to know if this is happening or not is when you take off your sock or if you take off your pants, is there a line around your ankle? If you have any bit of a line around your ankle, you have a fluid balance problem. And this could mean that you have entrapments in some of these key spots that our fluid systems get entrapped. That's the whole like premise behind the swelling reduction protocol. Or it could be from hormonal issues or dietary issues around the function of our liver, our spleen, and our kidneys. And for me, especially, what I've shared about is how important it has been to increase potassium, because potassium is what helps us like let go of the fluid from our cells to like drain things. And so I really see this change throughout my cycle in the month of like at times when my hormones have a greater, right? Because progesterone is a hormone that sort of makes us hold on to the fluid. And so during these times of the month where my progesterone's higher, it's so important for me to like stay on top of my potassium supplementation and getting foods in that have high potassium, because it really has a huge effect on the general amount of lymphatic congestion, fluid congestion, or bloating throughout my whole body. And when I have more volume of fluid, I'm going to have a tendency toward pooling in my lower extremity. And then what I get is foot pain. I get significant foot pain on both feet, and it's actually more lateral than it is medial. And why I say actually with that, because when I look at the visceral referrals, typically a visceral referral for the urogenital organs like the kidneys, which we associate mostly with fluid balance, is the medial foot. Lateral foot viscerally tends to be more associated with the digestive organs, with the intestines. But the intestines have a lot of lymph in them, right? Like 80% or something like that. Or I don't even know, not 80% is the immune system, but the immune system and the lymphatic system are very much the same thing. And so we don't think of it often, but our intestines are a big driver of our fluid balance system. And so it's like, no wonder I have lateral foot pain and foot pain in general. But I've even noticed that. I'm like, oh yeah, if I have like been on top, the months that I am on top of my potassium and my hydration and my movement to facilitate general lymphatic and fluid movement in my body, I don't have foot pain. I can walk I can do a day of walking at Disneyland and like have not a whole lot of foot pain. So I think foot pain especially is one of those things that we need to always like think about the bigger picture. I think foot pain, so many people have foot pain. It is like a very common thing to have foot pain. And it often comes down to like, okay, is there a visceral thing? Is there a hormonal thing? Is there a nutritional thing? Is there a fluid balance thing? And then what's the sensory situation like, right? Like I'll have a whole episode on like the revitalize your soul, like the use of the rock mats and why that's important. Our feet at the end of the day are sensory organs, but we stuff them in shoes and socks and we don't feel with them at all. So oftentimes foot pain can just be general like decrease of sensory information too. So there's so many things that we can address with foot pain before we actually blame a joint or blame the tissue or blame the foot itself. So especially if you're doing all the soft tissue treatment and the exercises and you're not really seeing a huge change, it's probably because it's not orthopedic or musculoskeletal. That was this scenario with my foot. Like I'm like, I have this pretty intense foot pain that some mornings feels like I have a fracture. But I do all the things. I check my mobility. I work on mobility. I work on strength. And it doesn't shift things. Then it ain't an orthopedic musculoskeletal thing in the first place. So now I got to look bigger and see what else is going on. And like I shared with you, it's like just another expression of my fluid congestion challenges that I have, which some are driven hormonally and some are driven inflammatory from a nutritional standpoint. And then like it's a little bit of it, especially too, I tend towards hypermobility. A little bit of it is because I don't have the stiffness to maintain the pressure in the veins and in the lymphatics to keep elevating it towards the heart, right? So when we can look at these things from a more whole organism approach, all the way from pediatrics to geriatrics, right? The whole lifespan, we start to be able to troubleshoot things a little bit better. And like I said, like this is the whole thing was like dealing with these two spectrums, dealing with these like perimenopausal type feelings of foot pain and changes in the collagen and like changes in my body, like feeling the stiffness of me losing, like changing collagen types, but then also like having my niece who is at the beginning of life, like having these issues. So very great. Like I said, very grateful to Bonnie. Shout out Bonnie. Bonnie Soto. I might have called her maiden name at the beginning of the show, but for also seeing full picture. And actually, now that I'm talking about it, in my course, like sometimes when I'm talking to other practitioners in my courses or on Instagram, two of the practitioners that always sort of like this whole organism lens of view makes sense to, pelvic floor physical therapists. I've shared that a lot. Like it makes sense to them that the viscera is a driver of musculoskeletal pain because they see it every day. And then pediatric PTs. Pediatric PTs are forced to see the through a lens of the whole organism and consider everything, because so often with the kids, it's not a musculoskeletal, truly biomechanical thing. There is, yes, it is, but it's being driven by something deeper. It's being driven by, like torticollis, being driven by reflux. Torticollis being driven by some cranial tension. And then this affecting their whole body and the way they move, right? Like a baby who has a reflux, like they move their head and neck and trunk very differently, right? So they already see things through this whole organism lens of view. So sometimes it makes more sense to them to consider things like iron levels, hormone levels, as a first idea instead of a last idea. So anyways, that's it for now. We'll see you next time. Hope you enjoy this different dive into foot and ankle pain.